You let us know when you're ready.
All right, are we good?
You have the gavel?
All right, we will call this City Council workshop for May 17th, 2021 to order. Do I have a motion to set the agenda? We seem to have a new agenda item too.
Yes, we've added an item that's a resolution for the street closures and alcohol sales for our 4th of July event. So in light of recent restrictions, we want to go big for the 4th of July. So we need permission to do that.
Okay, motion to set the agenda?
Motion to set the agenda with the addendum.
Second?
I'll second.
Martha seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, the agenda is now set. So first on the agenda is budget workshop number 2. Our city manager will review the proposed city budget for fiscal year 2021-22. Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I want to go over in very high level review of the first budget workshop that you held back in March, and then of the CIP workshop that you held in April, and then talk about some changes to the budget since the first workshop. And there are very few changes, but I do want to go over some of those, and then continue our discussion on what the appropriate property tax rate should be for the upcoming fiscal year. And then after this workshop, assuming that you give me clear direction on the budget, then we can schedule the public hearing for the June 7th City Council meeting for the budget public hearing and hopefully the adoption of the budget. And then we will do budget amendments at a special meeting later in June, which is our typical process. So quick review of budget workshop number 1. If you recall, I talked about the slow and steady growth in the tax base, and then the more recent experience of a little bit higher rate of growth in our property tax valuation. This is really 2019 was the reval. We'll have our next reval in 2023. The county's going to a 4-year cycle now on revaluation. So this is a combination of revaluation plus just natural growth, construction you see around town. Seth, this isn't moving. What's that little pop-up saying? Thank you. Your goals that you established last year at the retreat and you reaffirmed in this year's planning retreat back in January. Your main items are transportation, infrastructure, growth management, balanced growth, public safety, and parks and rec. I have included some items that you said you wanted included for our work plan this year and next year and subsequent years, but also some specific items that are included in the budget, such as the Abbey Creek Greenway, paving and resurfacing project, sidewalk project, North Belmont Public Safety Station, and multiple projects and improvements to our existing parks in the Parks and Recreation program. So as we talked about during the planning retreat, you've got and the budget should reflect implementation of those goals. I don't want to get into the details of all just one sort of comprehensive chart of the general fund, which is the majority of our operations. This was included in your workbook, but just showing the percentage of the general fund budget that goes to personnel, operating expenses, capital expenses, and debt service, and it's tracked over the last 14 years or so. So you see that personnel expenses are it's either 49 or 50% of the budget, but you asked last year to keep them at 50% or less of the general fund budget. Operating expenses are at 27%. That's consistent with last year. It's down from 29% and a high of, well, long time ago, high of 36%, but more recently 33%. So we've been trying to operate more efficiently using technology and better equipment, so we're reducing our operating cost. And you see the purple line is the capital expenditures, and you see once you adopted your 5-year plan, you see that capital went from being kind of the leftover funding item from the budget to one of the things that we want to be very intentional on how to fund these capital improvement projects. And debt service, as you'll recall, you have a policy that you don't want to spend no more than 12% of the operating expenses on debt service. And we have not done that. Looks like we got close. I think one year it was about 11.5%. It was 11% for a few years. It's down to 10. And in the proposed budget, it's down to 9%.
So when it was at 19%, I know that's, I don't know, maybe Parks, you were comment on that. Why would revenue be off so much? Was it property valuations were done during the recession?
I think that 19% in 2010, I believe that was the property purchase of the Gaither Road piece that was considered a capital.
That's a great idea too.
Mm-hmm. It was $1 million for 30 acres on Gaither Road.
All right. I was just curious because that's odd.
Yeah, so that's an anomaly. And back then we didn't break out capital, so how things were tracked was a little bit different.
Okay. I think it looks pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, 49% staff.
It rounds up to 50%, but yes.
Just look at that at 1% a year.
You let me know who to get rid of, and we'll do that.
Throw something out.
Okay. It is a ratio. So there's a lot of stuff on this slide. These are in your workbooks as well. This is the CIP for the general fund. I did add the Park Street and Catawba Street pedestrian improvements to this based on your workshop, the CIP workshop in April. And Kevin Krause and I did meet with NCDOT by phone call last week, I think. And they are working on kind of what we can do to make that project happen. Some options. So hopefully it's not nearly as complicated as it used to be, but stay tuned on that. So we are moving forward with that. And hopefully we'll have a plan for that intersection improvement to you sometime soon. Water and sewer CIP projects. We've had a couple webinars, including one this afternoon on the American Rescue Plan funding. We finally got the further guidance from the Treasury Department last week. Water and sewer is still an eligible expenditure for the American Rescue Plan funding. We should know by the end of this week or early next week exactly how much money we're going to get from that. It's estimated that we'll get $1.85 million in June, and then another $1.85 million next June. That can't be spent on general infrastructure, but water and sewer is eligible. And so when we get the further guidance, later this week, we'll know exactly what we can and can't spend on water and sewer. And broadband was the other piece of infrastructure, but the General Assembly has limited what we can do with broadband. So we'll be working on that and coming up with a plan when we get more information on how to spend that money. But clearly, water and sewer is an eligible expense. So my preference would be to spend that money first before we spend our money. But we'll get more guidance on what we can and can't do with that funding. So we may be able to accelerate some of these projects using the federal funding and then spending city funding. Stormwater CIP is the same as it was during the workshop.
Is stormwater included in that, or is it just water and sewer?
There is some green infrastructure, so some stormwater related projects could be, but I don't know if this would fit the definition. But we'll see. The Treasury released the guidance for states, counties, and entitlement cities, which are cities greater than 50,000 population. That was what was released, I think, on the 10th. And they're hoping to release the guidance for towns less than 50,000 population by the end of this week. And so hopefully it won't be quite as restrictive as what it is for the larger cities. So we've had one workshop on the budget, one workshop on CIP, capital projects, and since the first workshop in March, we've had a few changes. The biggest one, which I believe I reported to you a couple weeks ago, Now that we're further into the fiscal year, we've got more data. We've received additional utility franchise tax payments from the state. Those come out quarterly. The first one that we received for the first quarter of the current fiscal year was well below what we needed to meet the budget. So in the current year's budget, we estimate that we'll receive $900,000. I had reduced that down to $750,000 based on that poor performance of the first quarter. We've since received the second quarter and third quarter, and so we are back on track this year for the $900,000 mark. This is utility franchise taxes, your cable TV tax, internet tax, electricity, natural gas. And so as our town continues to grow, as people use those utilities, we should continue that. So I've bumped that back up from $750,000 to $900,000. That adds $150,000 in revenue to the general fund. I'll also let you know that Gaston County is going to increase what they charge us to collect our property taxes, to build those and collect them. They're doing that not just to us, but to all the municipalities. Although interestingly, not to the fire districts that they do the same service for. But that'll increase our cost by about $40,000 next year.
What's the total cost?
I believe it's $65,000, $67,000 next year.
So they're going from 25 to 65.
Yes, and that's a
Still cheaper
compromise.
than ourselves.
Well, yes. So we're in that weird thing where you hate to have to pay a lot more for the same level of service, but it's still cheaper than us hiring staff and doing it and chasing down bills.
What was the explanation for such a large increase?
And this actually was the compromise. Initially, they were going to go from $27,000 to like $85,000 because their costs have gone up, and they haven't done full cost recovery in the past, and so there's more of an emphasis on covering all their costs. We can argue whether that's a service that the counties should be providing, and we all pay county taxes, but they see it as a service that they're providing to the municipalities, even though it's just an extra line on the tax bill. But to your point, it's still cheaper to pay the county to do it than for us to bring that in-house.
How much higher would they have to raise it for it to make sense for us to do it ourselves?
We would need to have dedicated staff just for that, because it's preparing the tax bills, sending them out and collecting them, and then working on the tax foreclosure. So it's a year-long process. So you're at what, 60? We have about 6,500 water customers. So so more of those, more parcels than that. So each parcel gets a bill. So it would be several staff.
Okay.
If Gaston couldn't do it, if it got too expensive for Gaston, I would want to partner with another municipality or two to do it.
Okay. Okay.
Mount Holly did it for a while, but they gave it up.
And they gave it up.
I would imagine it has to be at least 100%.
And what Mount Holly's experience was, they were not collecting as much. The percentage of the tax bill collected was lower when they did it in-house. Gaston County does a great job with it. So it's a very good service that they provide. It's just they're now going to recover more cost of it. So it's well over 99% collection rate. So it's a good investment, but just got more expensive. We have received several requests for funding from outside agencies, and I'll list those on the next slide since that first workshop. And then, as I let you know, last week, Kevin and First Tryon met with the Local Government Commission staff last week to talk about our financing plans for the Recreation Center. We were hoping to go out for a 25-year term, and they said, no, you can't go more than 20 years. So, $12.5 million loan on 20 years is more expensive than 25 years each annual debt payment. Good news is we'll pay it off sooner, but it's just going to cost us more. And we'll go over that in a little bit. So here is a list of outside agencies or groups that have requested funding. You don't have to decide if you want to do this now, but I need to either plug this into the budget or take it out of the budget, depending on what we want to do. You all heard the request from Gaston County on their vision process. for $7,300. I didn't hear a whole lot of excitement to fund that. So
What?
So yeah. So based on
Is Gaston County paid for any of it? They paid half of it.
my understanding is they want the public sector to pay for half, private sector to pay for half, and then of the public sector half, the county's going to pay for a portion, and they want the municipalities to pay the other portion, which of course is based on their 2020, 2021 general fund. So instead of population.
I don't think so.
So
Yeah.
I did not include that in the budget based on the feedback from that meeting. The South Fork River Health Committee, which is the jurisdictions along the South Fork River and some environmental organizations and conservation groups, they're wanting to improve the overall health of the South Fork River. They're requesting $6,200 to $50 for some additional testing and monitoring, water sampling, but also for a match for a federal grant to help implement the work that they're doing.
Who are they, like in comparison to the river keepers?
So Martha's on there and Kevin's on there. And Kevin, do you remember who's the membership? I think the River Keeper is part of this group. What's the?
There are. It's a very diverse group made up of municipalities, environmental groups.
You and Martha serve on this group?
And this is a new group. It was first really established by Mayor Will Coughlin. And the COG is the facilitators of this group. And so we've only met about 5 times to date. And as Adrian mentioned, it's about improving the water quality of the Catawba River on South Fork that we border from.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And so it's a relatively small amount of money to help them really get started and get some good data and formulate a plan for improving the health of the South Fork. We normally would have had a presentation from the GGDC by now, but with our busy agendas and the merger between the Gaston Regional Chamber and the GGDC to now form the Gaston Business Alliance, which just haven't done that. If you want to hear an update from them and a pitch for continued funding for the GO campaign, we can arrange for them to come. But I think I sent you their request. They didn't give a specific amount for what they would like for the GO campaign for next year, but they did indicate that we had paid the $15,625 annually for the GO campaign, so they're wanting to extend that campaign. I do have money in economic development for this if you choose to renew our participation in that. So that's something that we, sort of like with the trolley group, we could bring them in and they could give you an update on what they've done, and you can decide if we want to continue funding that. as
Ryan,
well.
what's your opinion on that? Because you've been involved with that more than the rest of us.
They've kind of gone dark over the last year and
Okay.
a half. So I was kind of surprised to see this come through.
All right. So we maybe should ask them to do a presentation.
Yeah.
Because we just don't want to throw
I know
money.
you had asked me if they should. I was kind of caught off guard, but I guess they probably should. And we had funded it with the tourism dollars previously, but that budget's
Mhm.
spent.
Well, I think we split it, didn't we, with the city?
Yeah, we've been splitting it, and I think that given the constraints with the tourism authority's funding because of COVID and reduced business travel, if we want to participate, it's probably going to be all on the city and not on
This
the
year,
tourism.
yeah.
For this
Do you know-
upcoming year.
In round numbers, what we've funded them to date?
That about $15,000 a year sounds right, and I think they're in year 5, so
75.
$60,000 to $75,000.
I was gonna say, I thought, I may be wrong, I thought we split like 50,000 the first year, 25 from the city and 25 from tourism. Does that sound right?
Yeah, there was
Pretty-
an initial up front.
It was a pretty big chunk initially.
Then it dropped when they changed. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is in addition to our membership fees for this group. So, we're members of several regional groups and two chambers. I don't think we're a member of the Charlotte Chamber. So, but that money is specifically for the GO campaign. So we can ask them to have somebody from the Gaston Business Alliance come in at a workshop and present to you.
We had met with Michael Appleby last week. He didn't mention it at all. So I don't even know
My understanding, and this has been several months, is that the county is not contributing financially to it, but they're doing some in-kind stuff, and they're still coordinating the messaging between Gaston County Travel and Tourism and the Go campaign, but they're not funding it like they used to.
I mean, is this, I don't know if it's related to COVID, but it seems like it's kind of tailed off a little bit. I mean, like you said, they've gone
Yeah, it could have been
dark.
because of COVID. But yeah, I would imagine that's why. And they merged with whatever chamber.
With the
I guess.
Gaston Chamber. But yeah, we can. I mean, I've got the money in the budget, and if you choose to authorize us, we'll spend it. If not, go to something else. But we'll ask them to come to a workshop at some point. And then we have not received a request from CATS to help fund the design of the Silver Line. It's only a matter of time before we do. We're working with the other municipalities and Gaston County to kind of come up with a plan and a strategy for how to fund the light rail when that time comes. And so I don't have any more information than that. CATS is still trying to figure out exactly what's going to be the Gaston County breakdown versus the Mecklenburg County versus now the Union County, because I think it's extending into Union County. There's a lot of work that they're doing to figure out what's the total cost of just the design, just the engineering. Then obviously construction's the big one. But they're going to need some assistance from us, which we should expect to pay our fair share of it. We just don't know what that looks like now. And we may not have it in the upcoming year, but they want to have this thing finished by 2030. So that bill will be coming soon. So just stay tuned and keep in mind, I don't have anything plugged into the budget or the budget plan for CATS because it's such an unknown thing.
But while these others are optional, this one's not. We know we're going to have to contribute.
Yes.
Okay.
Or we just say we don't want the project. So, which we want the project. And this would be, and we don't know if it's Gaston County is going to be paying this and all the municipalities and all the residents of Gaston, through a local option sales tax like what Mecklenburg County has, or if it's a TIF funding or a combination of things. So we don't know if it's Belmont specific, Belmont and Gaston. There's just a lot of unknowns at this point. It's still
Yeah, it's going to
early.
be interesting because the municipalities that this is not going to directly affect are not going to want to get involved with it, even though it will benefit the whole county. So that is quite it's concerning to me.
Yes, and so we'll be working on what the benefits of it are. What's the messaging? This is not a Belmont project; it's a Gaston County project. It's for the benefit of all of Gaston County. So stay tuned for that. But again, $0 so far budgeted for this project.
So you don't even know what this part could cost us?
No, no,
It's
it's going to be a big number.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge project, but huge benefit. You just got to invest in it on the front end. So those are some outside funding.
They know how much money we have, right?
Yes. Yes. I was joking. We might be able to afford some of the public art at the station,
That's kind of just sit there.
or like maybe the sign.
Well,
Right.
they're even tapped
Start-
out over in Mecklenburg County. I mean, they're talking about having to go to the legislature for special approval for their sales tax. Like,
Mm-hmm.
good luck with that.
Yeah, and then there's some organizational structural stuff about they're the MTC doesn't have authority outside of Mecklenburg County, so what does the organizational structure look like? Is it a multi-jurisdictional? Is it just, there's a lot of stuff that we have to work on. But I just don't want you to be surprised if in a year or two we get a bill from CATS, but there'll be a lot of education, a lot of work on it. Just planting the seed that this is something we will have to budget in the future. So I mentioned the recreation center and the smaller term on the debt for that. We've done a really nice job managing the debt and actually not taking on new debt here in the last couple years. Your debt management policy is that you don't want the overall debt service payments to be more than 12% of your general government revenues. So let's just assume that we don't take on any new debt in the upcoming fiscal year. Your debt service ratio is 6%. So that, like I said, in the previous years, it was 11%. It's down to 9% this year. It's down to 6% because we've paid off several loans. And the new loans that we've taken on the last years are all under 3% interest rate. So if we have paying the current debt service payments for existing debt and add the recreation center, that ratio goes up to 7.2% next year. If you then tack on the debt service for the $1.25 million street and sidewalk project, that goes up to 8.1%. So we're still, well under the threshold. Actually, we're under what we were this year. So plenty of capacity to take on these projects. In 2022, 2023, assuming that we start construction, we have a debt for the North Belmont Public Safety Station, and that we start the construction and take on the debt for Abbey Creek Greenway, then we start to get at or above the debt service threshold. Now that assumes that we have the recreation center going, that we have the North Belmont Public Safety Station going, and the Abbey Creek Greenway at the same time, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a little bit.
Well, Adrian, once we get the station built, we've got to staff it. Full staffing is 9, I think. Is that right? So full staffing is 9. I mean, that's 9 more people to put on there. I mean, how does that factor in? I mean, we build it, we got to staff it. I mean, how does that play into these numbers? Because it looks like we're trending upward towards our ceiling.
So 9 firefighters would cost about $590,000 a year. And then, of course, that goes up as personnel costs go up, as salaries and benefits go up. I don't know if that's, and I certainly would defer to the fire chief on what the staffing level for the main station, the North Belmont station, and then the South Point station looks like.
Each of them have 3 per shift, so 3 a day, so 9 a day, 27 total, 28 counting the gap, is what that number is.
So 9 total per station.
But the conversation is, we're talking 2 different things. We're talking debt service and operating expense. Since the 9 goes in the other bucket, it wouldn't affect that debt ratio.
Correct. It would be in the operating bucket. Right.
Well, then how does it impact? We were taught, or does it have any impact? Because we had talked about possibly lowering the tax rate.
We will get to that.
Okay.
But yes, so just like with the rec center, I mean, we can't just have an empty building. So, that will be, and Zip's got a plan for, what that staffing looks like. It's a combination of full-time, part-time staff, just like you would have at a YMCA or anywhere else. And then there's operating cost for any building. So, but those, to the chief's point, the staffing and the operating costs would go into the regular budget. This is just the debt service for the construction. But it all costs money. So, and I will send you these charts. There's a lot of numbers on here. I was looking at over the next 5 years, what's the debt service for all, with our current debt, plus these additional projects that I just mentioned, the rec center, the $1.25 million paving and sidewalk project, the Abbey Creek Greenway, and the North Belmont Public Safety Station. Assuming that all of those projects are underway, not in the upcoming fiscal year, but the subsequent fiscal year, the 2022-2023 fiscal year, then we would be in violation of the debt service policy slightly. I skipped one. Slightly at 12.1% for everything but the public safety station. We would be in violation by 13.7%. So just a percentage and a half up on the North Belmont Public Safety Station. but only in that one fiscal year, because our current debt load continues to roll off each year. We're back into compliance in 2023, 24, and then 24, 25. If we wanted to drop the rate by a penny, we're still in violation of the policy, but slightly more, but just in that 1 year, then we recover the subsequent years. If we go down to a 50-cent rate, we're in violation a little bit more because we'd have less money to put toward debt service. But again, it's just the 2022, 2023 fiscal year that would be in violation of the debt management policy. And when I say violation of the policy, your policy says you should not spend more than 12% of the revenues on debt service unless you make an exception. You just have to acknowledge, yes, we're doing it. So in this instance, yes, we're going to exceed 12%, but it's because we're doing these projects and we're going to be back under 12% in the following year. So you're just acknowledging it. There's no penalty for it. It's just you're in violation of a policy, and you just acknowledge that you're in violation of the policy, but you have a plan to get back into compliance. And in this case, it would be the subsequent year.
What are we projecting the cost of the public safety station?
$3 million.
Okay.
Now, when you say we're in violation of policy, I can't remember, is that a policy, council instituted that 12%, so we're violating our policy. We're not violating any state policy.
No, sir. Yeah, so you're basically just acknowledging it, and it's just you have a policy to make sure that you keep your debt kind of in line with where the council at the time thought it should be. So all that brings us to property tax rate discussion. So at the last meeting, you asked me to find out what the property tax rates are for the other jurisdictions within Gaston County. So I provided the current year's tax rates and the proposed tax rates for next year for all the municipalities within Gaston County. You see, Stanley is still proposed to be the highest at 54 cents. Then Gastonia is at 52 cents. They were at 53. They dropped it at 1 penny after revaluation. So they're at 52 and proposed to stay at 52. And then we're next at 51 and a half. Followed by Mount Holly. Mount Holly reduced theirs, I think, by 4 or 5 cents at revaluation last year. So they're at 48 and a half cents.
Are you talking this year or next year?
Both.
Ranlo, isn't Ranlo going up to 50?
So Ranlo is, the manager in Ranlo is recommending a 10 cents tax increase or 10 cent per $100 valuation from 40 to 50. Lowell is recommending from 43 to 49, so a 6 cent tax increase. Those towns have small tax bases, and so to do anything takes money. And so when you have a low base, you have a high rate. When you have a big base, you can have a low rate. So this shows you kind of side by side current year and proposed year, and so that you can kind of see portion where those tax rates are. Again, we're in the top 3 in terms of rate of Gaston County. So just to let you know sort of where we are in comparison with our neighbors. Mecklenburg County, most of their rates are much lower because their tax bases are much higher. So Davidson is at 29 cents, and they're staying at 29 cents, and they bring in about as much money as we do, but it's because their property values are so much higher. So as we said at the first workshop, we're in a growing period right now, and with growth in the tax base gives you options on the tax rate. And as I just said, the higher your base, you can either keep the rate the same and bring in more revenue, or you can offset some of the growth in the base with the reduced rate to add the same amount of revenue. So when we started our 5-year plan, we assumed 4% a year growth in the tax base, and we've outperformed that each year. I think my first budget that I presented to you, 1 penny of tax rate generated about $125,000 or $130,000. Now it's up to $185,000. So our tax base has grown over the last 5 years. So our plan is working. And from what I see on Facebook, it's working too well sometimes. So there's a lot of growth in our tax base, and that makes everybody happy. So as we discussed at the first workshop, you can reduce your rate, the tax rate, and still accomplish the goals. Now, with the higher debt service payment on the rec center, it's going to be a little bit tighter when we have to shift some projects around and defer some of the capital projects if we want to reduce the tax rate. But you still can accomplish everything. It's just the timing may be different on some of the capital projects, or you may decide that there's some capital projects that are no longer a priority. But I will caution you that my budget and financial plan assumes continued growth in the tax base. So if we don't continue growing our tax base, then we will need to address this and either figure out that we no longer want to invest as much in our parks and our streets and all the infrastructure and all the capital projects, or in our staff, because we don't want to continue growing as quickly as we have been. So if our growth reduces, then our plan changes. So the plan that I'm presenting you assumes continued growth.
Am I doing the math right? So a half a cent cut would save somebody $5 per $100,000 house.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about $5 a person on a $100,000 house, $10 on, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So
So who wants to cut taxes and why?
I do not want to cut taxes because I feel like as a consumer, a person in Belmont, when you get hit with this CATS bill in the next couple of years, and then we're going to have to jump up something, because it's not going to be a few $1,000s. I want to know why you even decreased it before, if all you're going to have to do is increase it a year or two. And I don't see that we can, I'm not in favor of, because exactly what you said, it's going to save maybe $15 for somebody. Yeah, and that does not make good financial sense to me.
I'm not opposed to cutting taxes, but I think for me personally, and people that I would guess I represent or think like me, I'd rather pay the $15 and have my pothole paved and the nice, I like nice stuff. That's why I live in Belmont. I like nice things.
And pay
so
the
I'm not afraid to pay for them, but I feel like I've not heard anybody complaining about taxes. Now, when the property valuations went up, I heard them complaining about that change. But as far as just our tax rate, I don't get any pushback from it.
But it makes better financial sense to me to say, okay, we've got enough for one extra payment on the Parks and Rec Center that's going to benefit the whole community.
Yeah, I was just curious, I don't think people are dumb. So if we do a tax cut and then everybody saves $10, is that really a tax cut? I think people can read through it.
I hear from a lot of people about this. There was something I heard a lot about when I was out campaigning 2 years ago, completely unprompted, was that people feel like they're overtaxed and and I've also heard separately, which I guess is a related issue, is that they feel like we are spending a lot, and there are a lot of concerns around that. So I think the dollar value is less important than the fact that we would be showing some sort of, I guess, self-restraint is the best way to put it. Because I don't know that there would be very many people upset if we tap the brakes on a few of these projects, not necessarily cancel them, but just kind of spread them out a little bit more and kind of built out a little bit more slowly. I think we've got, historically we had a lot of needs that needed to be funded and fixed and all of that. And I think we've mostly hit a lot of those, and we're quickly moving into more of the sort of wants versus needs area. Because I can think of a couple of projects where, I'm a big fan of the project, and I think it would be great for the city, but I don't necessarily need to see that, next year or the year after, something like that. I would have no problem waiting. And I know a lot of people I've talked to have expressed similar interests too. So,
Mark, do you think that they realize the dollar amount like Ryan and I were just discussing? Because it's a different, you know, we all don't want to pay taxes, but if you're telling me it's $10 or $15 difference, I'm thinking, well, that's silly. So do you think that
No,
that would
but
make
I
a
mean,
difference?
they do look at like, a lot of people look at that chart we had with the neighboring municipalities and see that we're, top 3. And that's kind of where, they're looking comparatively to other municipalities in Gaston County, and we're definitely, up at the top of the list. And, there's a lot of other similarly situated municipalities that don't charge quite as much as we do for varying reasons. But I think that that's what a lot of people are looking at. They're not necessarily looking at the tax bill, but they're looking at the rate that they're actually being charged relative to other towns in the area.
Well, I mean, Martha makes a point in that we have a bill coming due of an undetermined amount. So, I mean, that's that side of the ledger. But I think, Mark's point, the financial savings is not there for the taxpayer. It's negligible. It's really, I think the value is psychological more than anything else for them.
Sounds like a dumb reason to do it, psychological.
Well, I'm not saying either do it or don't do it. I'm
Sounds
just
manipulative.
trying to say how I think people are looking at it.
Well, I think it's important that we, show that we're being good stewards and that we're not, we are considering this. We've decided that we don't actually need all of this money that we're taking from you. So we're just trimming it back a little bit because we're managing this in a way that is respectful of the, the taxes that people pay every year, and that, we're balancing that with what the city needs.
Well, Adrian, in your email, I know you had said something about all the funded positions, if approved, would require, I think, 3.3 more cents on the tax rate. And you're not recommending that we fund those positions this year. Well, let me ask you, when I read that, I may be looking at this in the wrong context, but I don't want to be put in a position to where I'm having to choose between a tax increase, a greenway, or fire safety. And that's how I'm looking at this, because where I'm going to land is we're going to do the fire safety. And to Mark's point, if we have to put some project on the back burner, then that's what we're going to do. Because I know this firehouse is, or the concept of this station, I think, has been around since the mid-'80s. We've known that we need it. And I've got to assume that from Keener, at certain times of the day, you're not going to make that 7-minute window to a fire, which is like in a heart attack, you've got that golden hour. That 7 minutes is your golden hour to either save that house or potentially lose it. So I guess I need you to put some more context around that email. I mean, are we going to be faced in the next year or two of choices between to provide the needed staff to increase taxes? Can we move forward with all the projects without doing that? Or are we looking at some choices that we're going to have to make?
You'll be looking at choices, certainly. I mean, we can't do everything. So
Well, to that, I would say, when we first increased taxes, you would initially come to us with a penny or a penny and a half. And the council at that time said, well, we don't want to do this piecemeal. We don't want this coming back and have to raise a penny here, a penny there. So he said, what is going to carry us for the next multiple years? And it was determined that 4 cents would get us to where we needed to be. I don't know how far out we are from that tax increase, but it looks like potentially we may be looking at raising it again, which is something that nobody had an appetite for. So maybe, reeling in some of these projects or pushing them off a year or so might be the way to do it. Because I don't have any appetite for raising taxes. I mean, I'm kind of neutral on whether to cut them or not. I mean, it may be not sound reasoning, it's a psychological effect, but and again, like Martha said, we got a bill coming due. But I think we need to hash out what our choices are going to be.
yeah, so just to clarify, when we had this discussion 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I gave you options, and it's kind of a similar discussion as here. I showed you what was in the neighborhood. I gave you some options of this is what this tax rate would be, this is what this tax rate, this is what this tax rate would be, this is what it would save. and gave the council 3 options, and the council selected one. So then I presented that back, and then the council voted that down, and then we came back the following year and settled with the 51.5-cent tax. So I did what you suggested that I do, and then it didn't work out. We ultimately are at a higher tax rate than what the council said they wanted and then didn't want the first year. That would have taken us to 50 cents, and the council went up to 51.5 because of these, to Mark's point, we had a lot of deferred maintenance. We had a lot of projects that needed to get done. Right. The rec center being the biggest one. Abbey Creek Greenway, yeah. So
Even the fire station, I think, is somewhat new from that conversation.
it's, yes. So it was one of those things that we've been talking about for forever, and the council finally said, well, instead of talking about all these projects and just complaining that we can't do them, let's come up with a plan to do them. So we're doing that. I say you have choices because everything is a choice. I mean, I give you $20, you figure out how you want to spend it. We can make it work at any of these rates, at the current rate of 51.5 cents, at 50 cents that we talked about at the last workshop. I'm introducing, just dropping it down by a penny to go 50.5. Just if you want to say we hear you, we're reducing the tax rate, and we can still afford to do that. If we need to add staff for the North Belmont Public Safety Station, for the Recreation Center, as our community grows, the goal is the tax base keeps growing. You're going to have an opportunity next week to approve a project that's going to increase the tax base over 10 years by over $300 million. We've got a lot of big dollar projects coming in. If we decide we don't want these projects, we need to stick with the current tax rate and then probably drop some of these capital projects and go back to how things used to be. So, but if you want these projects that increases the tax base, then you have the flexibility to reduce the rate and still do these other things. It's just, to the fire chief's point, it's just a matter of what area of the budget are you investing in? Is it more money into the debt service? Is it in the capital, or is it in the operating fund? And as the overall budget grows, because we're bringing in more revenue, because we're a vibrant community, we've got more sales tax coming in, more everything coming in, then you can afford to have the staffing that's needed to serve the growing community and the facilities that the growing community demands, and you still have control over how much debt we're servicing. So you can do it all. It's just a matter of where in that budget that you choose to spend the money. And there may be some CIP projects that were important to the council a year ago, 2 years ago, that are no longer important, so we shift those and we don't do them.
What projects do you guys want to delay?
I mean, I would consider, I mean, the Abbey Creek Greenway is something I think would be a really cool project, and I'm personally a big fan of, but is also getting more expensive every time it comes up. And I would consider that kind of more of a, nice to have, but not necessarily, if we're looking at something between that and a fire station or whatever, I would kind of consider that something that we can do if we have the money for, but if we don't, I'm not heartbroken if it waits a couple of years.
But
If
the
it
trick
waited a
with,
couple of years, wouldn't it be even more expensive then?
yeah, that's the trick. In other words, you're gonna bump it out farther, and then it's gonna be tougher to do. I think there's ways, Abbey Creek Greenway, to cut that cost, because I think that's out a little bit higher than I would have anticipated too, and I've been involved with greenways a good bit. But I think, looking at the financial part of it, I still look at my own self, since we live on the lake, and so therefore our house obviously must be wonderful. It's really not. I mean, it's a nice house. It's going to cost me about the $100 a year. So I would much rather give you that $100 a year and have these other projects going than to find 2 or 3 or 5 years from now that project is exorbitant, and we could have gone ahead and worked on it and made better use of the money. So that's where I look at that piece of it.
Did look at some of the forecasts that council, I guess, used when they were doing the tax adjustment back in 2018. And I know a lot changes in 4 years or whatever, but it was just kind of interesting to see what we were kind of projecting then versus what we're kind of looking at now. And back then for fiscal year 2022, our ad valorem was projected at 7.5 million. And it looks like this year we're looking at about 9.7 million in that category. So we are collecting, I think, a lot more than what we had even anticipated back then, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it does also kind of explain some of what people are thinking. You know, if we're collecting an extra $2 million in tax revenue every year that we weren't really planning on having, you know, and that does also kind of affect the size of the budget too. I mean, the other number in here is your total expenditures were projected at 14.1 million, and we're looking at like 16 point something this year. So it is a much larger tax collection, a larger budget than I think council had really planned on. That's not to say we're necessarily held to those projections, but it was just, you know, as I was kind of looking at stuff last night, just kind of, you know, kind of see where we kind of planned to be at this point in the process. We are significantly outperforming what we thought we would do, which I think has allowed us to do a lot of things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. But at the same time, you know, that maybe also be a signal that it may be a good idea to tap the brakes a little bit just to make sure we don't get too far ahead of ourselves either. But
You've got a really well-managed town.
yeah, I mean, that's,
I agree with a lot of what Mark says. I feel like I see that more at the federal level. Even your revenues exceed your projections. You're doing really well. Why is the solution always to just spend? You know, well, we made more, so now let's spend more. I understand that. You know, I don't think the solution is always, well, we outperformed, so now let's spend more money on more things. On the other hand, to me, where it's coming down is sort of what Richard was saying. We've got, you know, I saw that email, and there were a bunch of positions that were requested, additional positions in the fire department, Main Street, and I think with this water and sewer, and planning, but we're going to do the planning. And I don't know what kind of, you know, I don't necessarily feel comfortable to say, well, you want all these additional staff persons and we'll have to raise taxes by 3 cents to fund them. Well, we're not interested in doing that. In fact, we're going to lower taxes. You know, I'm not sure that sends a great message, at least in my mind. Because like Richard said, when we open this public safety station, you know, it is going to need to be staffed. And, you know, I could envision having a discussion in a couple of years from now and say, well, are we going to have our 9 firefighters? Are we going to have our greenway, or are we going to increase taxes? And we can say, well, I don't want to increase taxes, so let's have our firefighters instead of the greenway. But, you know, I don't necessarily want to, you know, I've gone back and forth in this, and for a while I was leaning more in the direction of Mark. And, you know, to me, it's just with the staff positions, and we don't want to increase taxes to provide the additional positions that our department heads say we need. And that's fine. I think that's, you know, but to then not only do that, but to lower taxes, I'm not comfortable necessarily with that. Because I do think if we have that discussion down the road, I'm with Richard, and I don't want to raise taxes. So let's have the 9 firefighters over, you know, if we have to kick the greenway down. But if we lower taxes now, that might not be a choice. So that's sort of what I'm thinking.
Well, and I'll tell you, the three choices that we had, if I recall, was to do nothing. The first presentation was 1.5 cents, and that was specifically, I think, to get the ladder truck. Council thought about that and rejected that first proposal and said, give us a number that carries us. And I think that's when you came back with the 4 cents, and that got approved. And that was fine. But, for me, when the reeval came in double what was expected, in some case exceeded that, we all of a sudden found ourselves in a windfall. And I was always concerned about that. I said, we're going to have to practice some fiscal restraint, because when you have that windfall, it's easy to start writing checks. It's the toughest thing in the world to say, well, I want this, but I'm going to hold off because, I could potentially face this in the future. And I knew we'd start seeing funding requests. It's, there's blood in the water. It's money. People, like you said, know what we've got, so people are going to come knocking and asking. I'm okay with holding the tax rate where it is, but I won't raise it. I will not vote to raise the taxes right now. So that puts me in the position, if I understand this correctly, of having to make some decisions. And if I've got to choose between a greenway or a park and fire safety, I'm going to land on fire safety. I know these things, these are the mechanics that make the city run. These are the things that we have to have. We can't choose to have them. We have to provide them. We don't have to provide a greenway. I mean, right now we're looking at, we've got ourselves developing a skateboard park. We've got a faction of folks that wants a dog park. I think Belmont already has 17 parks. And I look back at the Park and Rec Master Plan, I can't remember the guy's name who did it, but I think that nationwide, the average to service a community is like 3,000 to 5,000 people per park. Belmont, we break down to like 900 per park. So we're okay with parks as far as the data. We're okay.
There's lots of towns in Gaston County that don't have as many parks. They don't have a Main Street program, and they don't have greenways. That's the type of town people want to live in. They live in there. I don't think it's just about proximity. I think a lot of people like a lot of those things.
Well, I mean,
I wouldn't prioritize a park over a fire station, of course, but I think people make that choice when they live here of having parks and stuff. And all those parks, it's a big reason why everybody's property valuations just shot up too. Because if you're going to live next to a junkyard or if you're going to live next to Davis Park, it's a big price difference.
no, I don't disagree with that, but I mean, it's not like, they don't have parks, we do. And we've got a lot of parks. We got a lot of variety of offerings in parks. If we don't build the greenway, it's not like people can't go out and walk. I mean, that's right now, currently, that's how we market Belmont. We're a very walkable community.
What's everybody want to do?
While you're thinking about that, I want to just put a little bit more context to the, we're bringing in too much money, we're spending too much money. So the council raised taxes in 2018, and you can see subsequent to that, your personnel costs, and granted we have cost allocated some admin positions, but your staffing costs have decreased once we cost allocated, but after the cost allocation to go from 54 cents to 48, been pretty steady. Operating expenses have gone down. Debt service payments have gone down. The only thing that's gone up is the capital, and that was the whole point. So we went from 5% to now 13% on capital. So those are the improvements in the infrastructure, in the parks, and the quality of life things that draw people and draw businesses to our community. So yeah, we're spending more, and we're ahead of where we were in our budget plan because these investments are paying off, and because we have to have a balanced budget. We can't just say we're going to bring in this revenue, but we have to balance the revenues with the expenditures. And so, when the sales tax comes in higher than what we thought, because for a long time we weren't getting much in sales tax, and then we started. And it's with the Wayfair decision, we're able to tax online sales, and then of course this year people staying home and spending money. So we get, additional sales tax revenue, that's money that we're spending on capital projects. So it really comes down, like I say, every year it comes down to what kind of town you want and how much it's really the variable is how much you want to invest in the capital projects. So, we can certainly, we can take some of those projects off if we want to. And just to clarify Councilman Turner's question about the, raising taxes 3.7 cents for all the staffing that was requested this year, that was if in those positions, the 9 firefighters and the additional person in the Main Street program and the additional person in the planning department, which I've included funding just for the senior planner. If all those if all those requested positions were to be added to this year's budget as requested by the staff, the department heads and staff, then you would have to either have to cut other things or increase the tax rate 3.7 cents. If those positions aren't needed in the upcoming year, but instead are needed over time when the public safety station is ready, for example, then you've got time to plan for that, and hopefully I will outperform what I'm estimating over the next couple of years, like we did this past time. But those are future decisions. But what you do this year can, if you keep the tax rate the same, or if you just drop it slightly, then you don't have to raise it later on, presumably. But if you cut it a lot now, then you may have to reverse that later when the public safety station's open. We have to staff it. When the rec center's open, we have to staff it. When CATS comes to us and says, this is what it's going to cost. And I'm sure the light rail project is not going to come in well under their budget. So, and it's the longer that goes out, the more it's going to cost. So those are just decisions that you need to be thinking about. And like I say, we will make whatever tax rate you set, we'll make it work. It's really just, how many capital projects you want to get done.
Well, we're going to reevaluate the tax rate again in 2 years anyway, aren't we?
Correct.
When they do the reval.
Reval.
I'd be surprised. I know the value of my house is just, it's ridiculous. I don't believe it. But,
Me neither.
yeah. So, I'm not really concerned about the revenue side because I'm fairly confident we're going to make that. I see this as more of a cut to carry us through to the reval. And then, it sounds like, I don't know, based on the timeline we're looking at with the fire station and whatnot, that it may actually align that, that we can look at, what kind of staffing and whatnot we need for things like that at that time. But, I'm totally comfortable just, tapping the brakes on some of these capital projects to get this tax cut until then. But
Two things I don't want us to get too complacent about. The 50% or just under sounds fine, but our budget has increased, so our
That should be
personnel
coming down.
costs have, so we're talking about chunks of money here, and I appreciate what you're doing, but the math person is looking at those pieces of this. But the other part is we've got to look long-term at that 1,100 acres. This town is probably, I don't know exactly, but we're probably talking about doubling population at some point. And so we've got to have, maybe not all these parks, but a lot of services, a lot of things that we need to be thinking about so we don't shortchange ourselves or the community. So that, to me, is very important for me to think about. And that's probably not for another 10, 15, 20 years, but it's something that we need to be careful to think about.
That's true, but if we're going to look at it that way, maybe we need to focus on a park on the peninsula. We have been pressuring the county to partner with us on that Gaither Road property. But
Exactly.
I don't think anything's happened with that. But
Nope. The county's not provided anything for us. I think I don't remember who it is that's representing us. I know Charlie used to, but somebody needs, because we're getting shortchanged there, and we should not be.
Well, I think you're right. Belmont's a profit center for the county,
Yep.
and we should reap some of that back into our county.
Instead of giving them
City.
$7,000 for a vision statement.
Tell them what our vision is.
Oh, we will.
All they need to do is invest in education and roads and just stay out of everything else. Serious.
Well, let me ask you, these requests for positions were made because obviously they think that they are needed. I think the one that you know, again, and I don't want to say, you know, okay, planning. You know, I don't know what the workload individually is there. If you say there's enough workload that requires a senior planner. Main Street, you know, I'm somewhat familiar with what they do, but on a day-to-day level, I couldn't tell you the task level for each individual. But I can envision fire safety and firemen and what faces them each day. So, I mean, of all those positions, I mean, I know it's the most costly. I mean, that's the one I look at. I mean, if Buck has put them forward, I know he didn't do it arbitrarily. I mean, I think we have to take a serious look at that.
Did you take a serious look at it?
Yes, and he's here, and you can ask him why they're needed this year.
All right.
I give that in a three-step plan. I showed fund 3, fund 2, and then 1 a day, 2 a day, 3 a day. We need 1 right now. I was showing where we were headed for that north station. If you wanted to hire them alone, you get 9 now. Our need is 3. To get that ladder truck out of the fire station today. We bought it for a jump company, and you get 50% credit for it because it's a jump company.
All right. Can you expand on that terminology? What does that mean, a jump company, and what is it? In practical terms, what does half credit mean?
One set of, you only have 3 people. That's enough to put in 1 truck. So when a structure fire comes in, they don't take the engine, they take the ladder. You need to take 2 engines and a ladder to every commercial fire that you go to, or residential fire. And we're taking an engine and a ladder. So, and then sometimes we'll get it in route, sometimes we won't. If a part-time guy comes by and gets it, but when ISO graded us, we didn't get it in route enough during that grading period, so they give us 50% credit for it. We still reduce the rate because we picked up points on other stuff, but we got dinged on that one. So for me to say, how do I make you better every single budget year, that's one thing that I can do, I can put out there, make you better, is get the needed trucks to the scene. That's what it takes. So, in the way that I presented that budget, I guess you've seen, I said, you could do 3, and then 4, you could do 6, or you could do 9. That's how I presented it. My true need this year is 3.
All right, so what you're saying is right now, we can't roll the full complement of trucks to a commercial fire that SOP says it is required.
ISO, correct. Which, you can't run the city based off ISO. But if you wanna, you know, I try to run the city based off of it.
When you say that, does that mean you're not sending the truck, or you're sending a truck, it's just not fully staffed?
I'm sending 1 less truck than what they require us to.
And if you were to fully staff it and run all 3, I think you said at the last workshop, that doesn't affect the residential fire insurance. It only affects the commercial fire insurance, the lower our rating is now.
Correct. I pushed you down to a 3. And you can make mistakes like this and it not affect your rate. And if you went to a 6, the residential would feel it, commercial would.
All right, so in the future here, I mean, we've approved this, what is it, Perimeter West or something, in North Belmont. We've got an industrial park coming online. I mean, that's commercial property. You know, I don't know exactly what they'll be doing there, but I mean, are we getting to a point to where it's going to be very important to be able to roll that additional truck with these coming online?
I'm more concerned, closeness, what's gonna happen, and like you read on the, when you see on the news, 5 houses burned, that's what I'm thinking Belmont's gonna get to see one day.
So is this a safety issue or insurance issue? Or a rating issue?
When you bring on the North Station, you're gonna be putting 9 people on call within 12 minutes. That's gonna be safety marginal then. It ain't gonna be that, you know, Charlotte puts 25, 30 to a house.
Yeah.
Same day, same house. That's a good segue.
It was close. That was close. It's going to give you a demerit.
Same house, you know. So our guys are busy when they get there.
Yeah.
To do what they do. It's just, I mean, we bring the dickens out of them. They know, make it go away. You got to get in the house and put water on it. And if that's with 2, 3, 6, whatever gets there, that's what we do. And that's how we accomplish it. But even once the North Station gets built, and you have 9 people, that's still marginal for a working 2-story structure project. It's still a marginal number, so anything less than that, just because they're aggressive bunch of guys, but they're really that comfortable with it. And we're talking about 10 times a year.
Yeah.
You know, it's not every day, it's 10 times in 365 days.
Well, and it sounds like the danger is the density as much as anything for the residential, because if you have the townhouses, one fire there, then you need a chunk of people to hit all of it to keep it from spreading. Is that what I'm hearing?
And you're right, and it's in a matter of time, because,
Mhm.
you know, there's 27 fire departments in Gaston County, but can you get them here in 7 minutes? That's what the window of opportunity. Once that 7 minutes is over, it's gonna decide whether that house burns down, you know, burns top off of it, or if we put it out. So, when we think, it's just like, man, there's a lot of fire people in Gaston County. Why don't you just call for help? If you don't get them, I don't need 10 fire stations here to burn a house down. I can do that with 2 engines.
Why did you pick Planner? Why did you deny that? Or not deny, why did you?
I'm not
choose what
recommending
you
those.
choose?
Yes. I was surprised for 9 firefighters in the upcoming fiscal year. I was
Okay.
thinking it would be more staged to when the public safety station was operational, and then we can absorb it over the next couple of years. Certainly, as I said, as we grow, we need to add police, fire, public works. We've added police, fire, public works over the last several years. We will continue to do that as the workload demands and as our community gets bigger. As far as our jurisdictional boundaries, we're about as far north and as far south as we can go. So it's just going to be infill projects from this point forward. It seems like every single meeting we talk about planning and growth and development and traffic, and it all comes down to we need more people managing that, and at the higher level expertise at that senior planner level. So, I mean, everything's getting more complicated, and we can choose to address it or just complain about it. So I figured we would address it. The Main Street program, you know, their performance speaks for itself. They're fantastic, and you know, and it's not that I don't want more staff helping them with that, because I think that the more you market the Main Street program, that brings more businesses, more investment downtown. That just helps overall. But for this year, I'm not recommending it. That's not to say next year's going to be different. So I think those are all needed positions. So it's just a matter of when you fund them, because capital projects, you pay for them and you move on. Salaries are forever, yes.
Well, while we're talking about that, I did have a question about the salary study, because I added up all the personnel costs for each of the different departments in the budget presentation, It looks like we're increasing total spend on personnel by $855,000 from this year to next year. And that seems like a pretty big number. So I was just wondering how much of that is salary study related, and how much is not. I know there's 2 funded positions for planning and police. Looks like if you back those out, your total increase is 665. But that's still a hefty number. So I was just wondering, well, I guess I'd kind of like to get some more information about the salary study, like how we establish the benchmark, what we're comparing it to, because I actually broke it out by department too, and some of them are fairly modest, which makes sense, but like streets in particular, the spend increases by 40% from last year, or sorry, from this year to next year. I know that was one of the areas we talked about specifically, but that still seems like a really big change. I'd actually be surprised if we were underpaying our staff by 40%. I don't think we'd have anybody working for us at that point, but I don't know. I just kind of want to know a little bit more about how we got at those numbers. Since, I mean, like you said, once we kind of enact these changes, they're more or less permanent. So if that's possible, I'd kind of like to get a little behind the scenes on that.
Well, one of the baseline in public works, you said is up a little bit more. That's one of the main departments that we do have more frequent turnover. And one of the baselines that we looked at was a $15 start base. Some of them are coming in at like a $12.93 or $13.93 an hour. And it's hard for them to move. And it's just with, I know the federal guidelines are looking at going up to a $15 minimum. And we did some studies at some of the companies that are around, like Amazon and things of that nature, at a $15 base. So anyone that comes in the door in our public works, because that's the heaviest turnover area, that we're starting that at 15 more an hour. So that's why that one's so large in the percentage for our public works. And that's usually the first one. I could say every week to 2 weeks, we have some shuffling going on. So we're putting everyone in the public works department on the same level, so we can help with the movement and the turnover.
Well, how does that compare to like Mount Holly or?
Same thing. Mount Holly was part of our study. We did, I forget the number of that. I went off and forgot my spreadsheet on that. We did roughly 13 or 14 cities for comparison in our salary study, and that's how we came up with the rate in our local area. Mount Holly, Gastonia, Gaston County. We did Davidson. We put Charlotte in there, but we moved the highest out between Charlotte and Concord, because Concord is expensive. Their rates are a little bit higher when it comes to salary. But we took the highest comparison out of each category. But I can send it to you, send it to all of you tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, I'd appreciate that, because I mean, I don't know how I feel about a $15 minimum wage, because I know if we're looking at the federal, I guess, guidance on that, I think that what is informing that number tends to be very political. So I don't know that what they think up in Washington necessarily corresponds to what we should do down here, but yeah, I mean, I'd kind of like to see the data behind that.
I'll get that to you. Yeah, and it may be more political in that aspect, but if you look at the actual companies, even if you go across the bridge here, we've got Amazon. Our fire department loses more fire, we lose more firemen going to Charlotte. I guess it's because of the central location. Charlotte, and we just lost 2 to Charlotte Mecklenburg Water because of the rate of pay.
Well, I don't know that we're ever really going to be able to compete with Charlotte, though.
No, we can't, but I think we can be competitive to a degree that at least if we give them more than 10 and 12 and $13 an hour, then we'll be more apt to stay.
We were looking at where we were losing employees, and then what other towns are paying, and then what some private sector. I mean, you can do parks and street maintenance all day for $13 an hour, or you can drive an Amazon truck for $15 an hour. So it's, and particularly with the street department, you know, I'm sure you've heard for years about just the carousel down there. Whenever there's a water and sewer position open, somebody from streets goes to water and sewer because they make more money. And so we've had just almost constant turnover with the street department. So, you know, as Bill presented at the retreat, he's got a plan to address that turnover. And that coupled with the salary study, we think is going to address those issues. Excuse me. So it's, you know, we weren't looking at $15 an hour as this magical, you know, political issue. It's what the local labor market is. I mean, McDonald's, you see their advertising starting up to $17 an hour. So it's just, again, you ask a lot of the staff. You want high quality work that comes at a cost. We don't have to do that. We can go back to the old way of doing things and not pay people very much and just don't have a whole lot of expectations for them. And you get what you pay for.
Do we do exit interviews?
Yes.
Is that the salaries? And because I know, like, I mean, I've left jobs before where the salary wasn't really the driver there, but
Yes, salary is mainly there. Some of them I have one to leave, and some of the younger ones, they don't look at the benefits more than they look at the base rate of the hour. And they will leave and go for $2 or $3 or $4 on the hour and don't have as many benefits. So that's what it's hard to compete. When you look at the needle post, yes, do we want to try to increase their salary to keep them here with the benefits that we do offer? They may appreciate it as they get older. Or are we going to continue to have new hires in that department? And that costs you more. I don't know if you were here a few years ago when the focus group did our salary study, and they advised how much, turnover rate, it costs you $4,000 to $8,000 when you just go out the door. Because most of them are coming in our water and fire department. They come in and get the base training here, and they're going for more pay, which we're not gonna keep everyone. I would rather lose 1 or 2 a year than 3 or 4 every 6 months.
So you're going to email us that salary study?
Yes.
Because I'd like to see where else the salaries are increasing besides streets.
Because I don't know how I feel about that number. I didn't realize it was so big, I guess, until I looked at it.
Are you looking at just salaries or the total personnel cost?
That's total personnel. I did bring it out.
Because
Where's
our
the
retirement
salary
costs
number?
went up.
I'm showing, so I went through here and pulled out the salary line items. And for the general fund, I'm showing 642, a 13.1% increase across those budget line items, which is still pretty big. I mean, the other thing I was kind of wrestling with too is, I know sometimes if you find that your salaries are below rate or below market, you don't necessarily just drop all the money in on it once. You kind of phase it in, because that's, I guess what initially started this was I looked at the size of the overall budget from this year to last year. It was going up by $1.5 million. So I was trying to find out what was driving that, and this was the largest increase or contributor to that number.
Was our last budget not especially conservative due to COVID?
Yes, I pulled it back, remember? And so,
Yeah, I
so
mean,
comparing-
I know there was
comparing
some.
The current year to the proposed year it's not an accurate
Yeah,
compared
but
to what it would have been.
I know, but I mean, the common Joe on the street is going to see a $1.5 million increase and smack me across the face for something like that. You know, it's big. And it occurred to me that I had not actually seen. I know we've talked about the salary study, but I hadn't really seen it. So I just kind of wanted to see where we were getting those numbers. And
It was to keep us competitive with our competition.
yeah. Well, the other thing is, I don't know that I'd really consider our competition Amazon and Charlotte, and I don't know, maybe there's just a difference of opinion, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to compete. I realize that people can go get jobs at those places, but the level of benefits and perks and everything else that those employers are able to offer is something that we're never going to be able to compete with. So I don't know. I don't really have a solution. It was really
Well,
more of a,
I think, Mark, we can't compete with the private sector. We're just never going to be able to compete with them. Using them as a benchmark might not be the best indicator, but I want to touch back to the fire department for a minute, just my position. I would like to scale in these firefighters for several reasons. I mean, 3 this year, possibly because I think we need to roll all the trucks we're required to roll. You know, we're creating an environment when we're pushing these houses closer and closer together, where fires can jump one building to another. I think Buck was kind of touching on that when you're saying, 5 houses going up. Someone shared a video with me over in Steel Creek. I don't know if it was about 9 months ago. It looked very similar to Belmont. These houses, I think they were code 12 feet apart, and that's exactly what happened. They jumped one to the other. The one house that it didn't jump to, all the vinyl siding melted from the heat. So I don't want to send an understrength company to fight these fires, because it sounds like we're understrength now, and even with that 3rd truck, comparatively speaking to Charlotte, we're still understrength with what they roll to a fire. Now you can say that's 2 different cities, but a fire's a fire. I'm sure there's a certain methodology that they all ascribe to on how you fight that and how many men you throw at it. And I don't care how good Buck's guys are. I mean, you're under strength, you're under strength. Also, if we're going to be bringing this station online, again, this is my way of thinking. You bring these people on gradually, get them trained, and when you open that station, you've got seasoned firefighters who know Belmont, who've been in the system, rather than potentially hiring 6 or 9 new guys. You're our new guys, this is your firehouse, these are your trucks. This is North Belmont. That's my perspective somewhat on that.
Are you suggesting that we make 3 firefighter hires?
Well, I mean, I think you proposed a graduated scale, isn't that right? 3, 6, 9 for hires?
We're making progress. You will have to indulge me just a moment, because 1922, we had no fire truck, and that's when Stowe Manor burned, not to the ground, it was gutted. And at that time, Sam's granddad gave a truck to the town, because not necessarily do you think it would have saved his house, but he figured that the Gastonia truck was where they had to call, because they only had like a brigade or something. So I'd like to see us continue to make progress from that 100 years ago. So thanks for indulging me, because that was quite interesting. Not the family telling that, but firefighters and the history of the town. Yeah.
I need to excuse myself.
Yeah, I was going to say,
But, I was just going to say that if you all decide you want to cut taxes, I'll support that. I'm okay with where they're at today. I would not support a tax increase. But anything else is fine. Even if you want to cancel all of our city council salaries too, that's fine.
You think we're getting paid $15 an hour, Ryan?
I think you should pay them 20 and get guys in there who should spend their career here. Is what I think you should do. Versus churning a bunch of guys at $12 an hour who don't care about the town or the community, probably. But that's a different subject. I'll see you guys.
Thank you.
well, all right. On that note, where does that leave us?
With a decision?
I'm in favor with what Richard said. If we think that we need to do a planning and a Main Street person and the firefighters, and it's going to make that happen by not changing the tax rate in order to not decreasing it, to me, that's what we do. And I think we've got to educate our constituents here, because once again, if you tell me how much money that is and what you're doing with it, as long as I know, then I'm going to be not thrilled, but I will at least understand the whole step. I think sometimes we talk about transparency, but we don't really tell enough detail of what's going on that the average person could understand it. And I mean, I will say, when I first came on board, I was amazed at what we were not in control of in a number of situations. So if you had explained that to people, they would have better understanding. So we've got to take some responsibility there to see that that's done. And I don't know that Facebook is all of it, but there's certain things, and we need to think about that with regard to this whole picture too.
I think you're exactly right, and I think now that they've lifted a lot of these restrictions and mandates on us with the weather, this is a good time for us to go to Belmont, Greystone, you know, and go and have these community meetings and just, you know, field the questions. But like Martha says, you know, just tell them, you may not realize that these are the constraints. I mean, you think that we have these powers and control, but, you know, we need you to know what we're in control of and what we're not. And, you know, whatever other topic pops up.
Well, and just driving down South Point Road now, and you guys don't, Jim maybe does, but I think Chick-fil-A, I'm glad it's coming. I like Chick-fil-A, but it is ugly. The streetscape, the curb appeal of that South Point Road is awful. And I'm thinking, I wish we had architectural controls to be able to say this, you got to do this if you're going to have this sitting right on South Point Road. So yeah, I think that the community meetings are good, but I'm in favor of leaving the tax rate as it is because I want the fire. I want, if Adrian and Main Street people think they need that, then I think we need to look at that as part of our picture.
Does our holding our line on the taxes, does that accomplish that?
So I was just adding, if you're looking at 3 firefighters plus the additional Main Street person, that's a total personnel cost of salary, benefits, and uniforms of $272,665. So my original option last time of going down to the 50-cent tax rate, that was a reduction in overall revenue of 283. So it's essentially a wash. So if you keep the tax rate the same, then you can add those 3 firefighters and the Main Street person.
What if we held capital spending the same? Because I think there's a $300,000 increase. Like what impact would that have?
You just do less capital projects, or fewer capital projects, excuse me.
Well, I mean, that would be a way to have our cake and eat it too. I don't know how everybody feels about that, but.
So, okay, so I mean, I'm open to hearing what you're suggesting.
So
I mean,
the cost of the tax cut is what, 283?
283.
And then the firefighters cost
272.
The capital budget is supposed to increase by $300,000 this year. So you could do all 3, I think, and still do the tax cut if I'm adding that math in my head correctly.
You're saying not spend the 300 on capital?
Well, it just hold capital budget to what it is this year. So it's not even cutting it, it's just not increasing it.
we're going to look to Adrian and see if that's viable.
Sure. I mean, you have full discretion on the capital stuff, and that's just, you know, you're hearing from the residents, you're hearing from the advisory boards, you're hearing from the staff of the things that we need, in some cases, maybe the things that we want, that we don't have to have. And you have a choice, you know, you're not required to do any of them.
How much are you talking about carving out of the capital?
It would just, so Adrian's budget calls for a $300,000 increase over this year's budget. So what I'm saying is just don't increase it. You just leave it at what it is this year. So capital would be flat.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's 1.9 million, if I'm looking at my notes, right? Yeah, 1.9 million. So that would be the same we spent this year, spent next year. So it's not a cut, it's just not an increase.
Mm-hmm.
It's deferred.
Right.
And that would pay for those additional staff that I did not have
Yeah,
included in the
then we can
budget.
get the firefighters, we can get the tax cut.
And that's reducing the tax rate to,
$0.015?
Penny?
A penny?
Penny?
I can compromise on a penny.
We can make that work.
all right, well, I mean, I'm open to options. What is your position on Martha? I think we need to hear from you all.
I won't vote for a tax cut. I just don't think physically, looking at the big picture of it, it's responsible for us to do that, looking at what we're looking at in the next 3 to 5 years. So I won't support the tax cut. Not that I don't want it, it's just that I don't think it's as responsible as we need to be.
I'm just, you know, I think there's some things in that capital budget that maybe we can defer, but I mean, what choices are we, is that going to be, if we take 300,000 out of that, is that going to be something that we need versus something that we want? I mean, what's going to be affected if we take that 300,000 out?
But the other piece of it is, as we've talked a few minutes ago, whatever we would defer, the cost is going to go up on those capital projects. So it still fiscally makes better sense to me to go ahead with those if they're things we want at all.
Well, again, I hadn't thought about that context, but, your comment about the light rail, I like the idea of a tax cut, but we also have this thing lingering. It's a shadow, and we don't know how big that shadow it's going to cast on us financially.
Cast a pall.
Yeah, it's going to be a fall.
And I think we're all in agreement that we want the light rail.
Mhm.
And when it comes, we want to be able to write that check. So, I mean, in some ways, I find myself in some agreement with you and in some agreement with Mark. I mean, I do like the idea of cutting taxes, everybody does, but I don't know.
Well, a lot of that's so up in the air right now. I mean, there's a dozen different ways we could pay for it that don't involve pulling money out of well, maybe not a dozen, I'm exaggerating, but there are other ways that we can pay for that without necessarily pulling money out of the general fund. Depending on how our conversations with the county and the other governments involved go. It may even be, who knows when it'll happen. Like, I know Charlotte's targeting 2030 as a completion date, but I know they've got several things that they have to figure out on their end to make the project viable. So, I mean, I'm a little hesitant to kind of lock myself into even a very general funding commitment for it at this point, just because we don't know what it will be, when it'll be, and really anything beyond that, they're probably going to expect us to pay for something. But I think there's a lot of especially with a light rail like that. There's a lot of opportunities for other ways of funding that around like different tax districts and sales taxes and things of that nature. So, I think it's a fair point. I just don't know that I necessarily need to plan for it in the budget at this point.
Well, I would agree with you, but I mean, besides that, I mean, nationally, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, we're all kind of banking that, the tide is going to continue to rise, and there's a lot of factors beyond our control that can impact us here. In 2007, when they lowered the tax rate, that was in anticipation of Reflection Point, a lot of things coming online, and a boom. But what happened there, the economy tanked beyond our control. We couldn't impact that. So, I mean, that hit us pretty hard and put us in a position for a decade to where we really couldn't do any capital improvements. And I'm not saying I see a lot of boogeymen, but I mean, I see a lot of instability nationally and internationally. I'd hate to see a scenario come about again to where the economics of the country start grinding to a halt or slowing down, and then we've cut our tax rate, and then we're not in a growth period. But again, that's it's all speculation.
One other thing, Adrian, and I think we talked about this before, I want to make sure, do we have all the money set aside for what we'll need to do our sewage to Charlotte?
Yes, that's
We do
included.
have that all set aside?
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, we have money in the capital reserve and the utility fund.
Okay, enough to
But that
cover
was,
that.
yes,
Okay.
Is that the tie-in to the wastewater?
yes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is that potentially applicable by this rescue plan, that we could throw that money at it,
I had the same thought.
Potentially.
potentially?
But the trick is, will
We
we have
have
to
to-
spend it now?
Yes.
I think that's.
So the
yes, we're not
webinar that
quite
we were
there.
on this afternoon, we had to spend it by December 31st, 2026, I believe was the date. That you have to spend all your rescue plan money. The latest timeline from Charlotte Water was 2024, I think 24, 25. So it's going to be
Yeah,
tight.
questionable then.
So this is a workshop.
Mhm.
I mean, we're just bouncing
Sure.
things around, so we've got time to consider all the points that have been made. You need a final decision by
Well, I mean, it would be when we vote on the budget at June
in
7th.
June.
I would like to have clear direction so that I can advertise for the public hearing with the actual budget.
Clear direction today.
I would like it today. If not today, then we need to have another workshop.
I'm sure Ryan
We
would
can
love
take a
that.
vote.
Yeah, you can take a straw vote on it. And
Could,
We just can't deadlock 2-2 because Ryan's not here.
yeah. Well, if, that's just for a year or two. Because I'm going to say, if we get this 1.85 million for water and sewer, is that, we can say, well, let's cut 300,000 from there because we're going to get the 1.85 million,
Well,
and that we square all the.
but that's out of the utility fund.
Mhm.
And so, I'm not recommending that we do anything with the water and sewer rates. We'll keep those steady again. So we haven't increased
Yeah.
those in maybe 2 years. And we're in a position with that fund to take on those capital projects. The water and sewer rates cover all the operating costs within that fund. And we've got capital reserve to pay for the capital projects. The rescue plan money will just help us accelerate those projects or do some of those first. The Charlotte Water Connection, we will get a state, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan, which is a it's a 0 or 1% interest rate from the state for that. That's what Mount Holly's done, and that's what's in our agreement with Charlotte Water.
how much do we take in a year from residential water usage? Ballpark.
I was in
I
here.
have to get you that money. To get you that information. The overall for water, it's about $4 million, and then sewer, it's about the same.
So it's 4 million a year, roughly? Okay, because I don't know if I was thinking along the same lines you were. I was thinking instead of doing a tax cut, since we're getting this found money, which is almost the equivalent of roughly $4 million or close to it, could we cut the water rate instead? But if that's just 1 year, that wouldn't
Yeah.
seem to hold up. I mean, it's a tough decision. I mean, like I said, I can see the merit in both arguments, but
So just to put a positive spin on it, my first budget workshop, when I first got here, we spent 30 minutes talking about whether or not to paint the steps on the front of the water plant, and we couldn't afford to do that, and so that was a deferred item. So
Yeah, now we're
in a
talking about
much
how
better
many
position.
$1 million buildings we want to build in
Yes.
a year. So, yeah,
So
good problem to have.
Yes, they're tough choices. I'm not making light of it, but they're good choices to have to make.
I mean, I would like to lower taxes, but this may not be the time to do that.
I
So
mean, if
I
you
would-
put it to a straw vote, I'd say keep the tax rate with, I want the new positions that we talked about, the 272, and keep the tax rate, because I'm just afraid if we lower it, we're going to end up increasing it later, and that's not going to be something we want to do, and that's going to have, I don't know.
Well, the reval's in 2 years anyway. I mean, we're gonna.
It's a totally different discussion then, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we're gonna change the tax rate again next year.
And people's tax bills will not change until reval, unless you've added on to your house or you've done something. So, whatever your tax value is of your house, it's going to be the same until reval.
Yeah.
And obviously, I've made my position clear, but I do think that we need to make a list of, these are the pertinent pieces of information, and this is why we're doing or not doing whatever it is, so people understand it, because people want all the information, and they think it's supposed to just come to them by osmosis or something, and so we're gonna have to be responsible to make sure that we get the information out.
I think we've got also the Abbey Greenway. I mean, the costs continue to rise on that. I think we've got to decide what it is we want to see in the park. You know, I mean, for certain events like, you know, an upcoming wedding, there's a cap, you know, and we told them this is your spending cap. Anything beyond that, you know, figure it out. And maybe we have to start telling our developers who are doing these projects, you know, this is what we want to see. This is what we've allocated for it. And we don't want to see any cost increase. Because it just seems like things keep going up on us. And, you know, when you've got lots of money, it's easy to say, okay, go ahead. But I think we got to start towing the line on.
On the other hand, if you notice, there's a lot of inflation lately. And that has some.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's true. But then again, it puts us back in a position of how much do you want to spend? And, you know, do we continue to write checks based on the rate of inflation, or we draw a line that says we're willing to eliminate these items at this time?
Yeah.
Well, and you look at the skateboard park, $50,000 16 years ago would have built quite a wonderful one. It's costing us $250 now to build, you know, a nice one, not anything outstanding, but a nice one. So, you know, it's tricky. It's hard to judge all that.
All right, so let's go ahead and decide the issue. I could call the question, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's I don't know. I have to say I want to stay and add the new positions and stay at the current rate.
I do as well.
All right, I think I've got to go along with that. I mean, I would like to lower the rate, but I don't know about the wisdom of it at this time.
I know I'm comfortable lowering it, but clearly I'm the only one, so.
Don't feel bad. There are a number of times I've been the only one voting a certain way. So
Oh, no, it's
okay.
It's a position I'm familiar
It's
with.
not. It's not an easy. This is not an easy decision. It's,
No.
And I think that's been, as I said, tough for me getting into this to realize that it's so multifaceted. It's really hard sometimes to judge how many of the pieces of the puzzle are moving at one time too.
Well, I think this is something that we need to come back and revisit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because, you know, Adrian, you say, what kind of town, what do you want our town to look like? What do you want to live in? And you know, that creates a certain picture in your mind. But I think the questions, you know, my dad always told me when I had money, he said, you know, you look at it this way. You've got needs, you've got wants, you've got desires. You know, we're categorized by that.
Yeah.
We have got to meet our needs. You know, and the way he would phrase it to me, you know, you meet your needs. You know, once in a while, you know, you get your wants. And if you're really flush with cash, maybe you get that desire. But he said, you have got to cover your bases. And I think as a city, you know, our bases are the cogs and things, fire, water, sewer, that actually make the city run. And you know, those are we gotta make sure we've got those bases covered. But I would like to revisit possibly looking at our tax rate in the future.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I had one more very specific question about the budget, if you'll indulge me. So I noticed in your budget message, you talked about health insurance premiums dropping. I just happened to notice this when I was looking at the salary stuff last night, but the group insurance account number, I added them up across all departments, and where'd it go? That total increased by $97,000. So I imagine there's probably more than just health insurance in that account, but that seemed like a notable increase, especially since I was kind of expecting the number to go down. Do we know anything about what might be driving that? If like there's another insurance product that we're offering that perhaps is getting more expensive?
Well, actually, our medical insurance went down, dental went up just a little bit. Vision remained the same, and life insurance went up, 3 cents, 3 to 4 cents on the thousand. But the whole thing probably went up because we are looking at more employees now. As you bring on more employees, of course, that base is going to go up.
Okay.
I'll verify those numbers, but
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's what we got from the league.
Insurance did go down.
Okay. Yeah, I was just, it just kind of stuck out at me because like, and it was some departments, it was more than others. So maybe it is tied to salaries, but yeah, if we could just
Yeah, 'cause
run that
every time
down.
we add more, employees, that goes, the FICA goes up, the medical insurance, everything that costs a lot.
Right.
Let me ask you one question. I mean, if we're going to approve a position for Main Street, where is that person going to go? Because I know, I mean, right now the director, Phil, if I'm not mistaken, he doesn't even have an office. I don't know where he's working, but he doesn't have an office. So if he doesn't have
He
an
has an
office.
office at City Hall, beside Cassidy's office.
You do? Okay. Okay, because I thought we were down one office.
I think that was temporary.
No, there's 2 offices and a workstation at the Main Street area.
Yeah, I think they're in there with the chamber.
All right, well, let's talk about alcohol, if everyone's,
I just want to recap to make sure
okay,
that
yeah,
I've got
sure.
that we're all on the same page. So I will need to adjust the budget, keeping the tax rate the same, but adding those new positions, the 3 firefighters and the Main Street position, and then holding the capital line item the same from the current year. So about that $300,000, we'll figure out that exact number, but basically offsetting that cost of the additional personnel cost by reducing the capital cost, which is approximately $300,000. And then, of course, you know, we'll bring those projects to you. This just allocates a certain amount of funding that we have to the various projects. And then are you good to proceed with those changes and then go into the public hearing, or do you want to have another workshop to look at it before the public hearing?
The adjusted final version?
Or are you okay with me just emailing it to you?
I think it's fine to email it.
Yeah, I'm fine
What
with
would
that.
the Main Street person do? I wasn't 100% clear on that.
How many people are, Kurt? How many employees do you have right now?
If that's a position that's going to touch tourism, my recollection of the local act for our tax seemed to suggest that there might be some opportunity to use that money to fund a staff position. Is that, like, I know that particular fund is under a little bit of stress right now, but I'd certainly be interested in exploring that opportunity if it exists.
Well, I don't know if we're on the same wavelength, but I mean, I've talked to Adrian in the past. I mean, I know we're funding an agency to handle, you know, a lot of our travel and tourism. And I brought up, you know, what if we brought that position in-house if statute allows that? Because instead of getting, you know, hours per month, you know, we could get hours per day.
Yeah.
And have a full-time person marketing, you know, Belmont, doing social media, or split the cost. I mean, I think there's a scenario under the statute where that would work. If I read it right, but someone else is going to have to read it because.
I think you're right, if I recall.
I kind of like that idea rather than hiring an external agency, actually having one of our people doing all that.
And now things that are opening up, that budget should kind of get rejuvenated too.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, adding this position is somewhat risky for us because some people have asked me, you know, how many people do you need to handle what, 5 blocks, 6 blocks. So, I mean, your idea of expanding out into Belmont is one that John Church had when I was talking to him. He wanted to grow Main Street and bring in some of the bigger players off the boulevard with the ultimate goal of, through dues, you more or less transition to funding yourself to a great extent. Because I think there's 2 models. The city can pick up the tab for a lot of this, or you can fund yourself through an MSD or through dues. So, I mean, if in that direction, I'd like to explore that. But if you can bring this third position on and focus them in on marketing Belmont and maybe travel and tourism, looking at help fund that position, split that cost with us. I mean, we've talked about that before, but I don't think we've ever thought the time was right to do that. And maybe
Yeah, and then it's, I mean, there's some
Opportunity.
cost savings there because they're spending $30,000 or $40,000 a year on marketing. So, I mean, that makes total sense to me. Oh, 80,000. Wow. Okay, so I was not exagerating that time.
well, the budget,
In previous years.
the travel and
Yes, this year's
tourism,
been-
you know, we're bringing in 110,000, but then like she said, you know, 80,000 plus is going to a marketing firm,
Yeah,
which really reduces the travel and tourism's board ability to meet our mission, you know, funding things to bring in.
and that would give some integration with the Main Street program too, because then they'd be working for Phil, they'd be doing the marketing for the tourism board. I'm liking this the more we're talking
So
about
I
it.
think so the local act that authorized us to do the occupancy tax and have the tourism authority, it doesn't state how you do those tasks. It just says that you have to spend, you know, a certain amount of your money on this and a certain amount of money on that. It doesn't say who does it. So if we brought that in-house, we could sort of cost allocate that position between the city and the tourism authority, sort of like we've cost allocated.
I think it's a good idea. I think it's a
Yeah.
great idea.
Now,
I agree.
that the tourism authority would have to go along with that, and you know, because it's
Well, don't we
they're charged for
appropriate the
spending the money.
money to them? So if we took the, I don't know, maybe Parks might have an opinion on this, but if we took the money and paid for a person and then just gave them the rest,
we'll have to look at that statute and see.
I'm not sure, yeah, we probably need to get Parks. to
I
look
think
at
it's
that.
worth looking into because when you look, and you know, that's just the nature. I do not know marketing, but when I looked at how much we pay them and how many hours we get per month, it's pretty high cost per hour.
yeah, I don't think we're getting the value that
you
we
know,
should be from
whereas
that
if we had a
contract.
person who was dedicated to marketing Belmont,
And I think that there's, you know, that person could, you know, promote downtown, promote our recreational activities, promote the garden, promote us as a tourist destination, and we have consistent messaging coming out, and you know, we would further identify Belmont as a brand, and you could do that in-house using general fund revenue as well as the tourism revenue to save on that general fund side of it.
Yeah. And they'd be tied into
To take
everything
that
we're
to your
doing.
board.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they've heard it from me before, and it was met with tepid interest, but you know, I don't know that I explained it really, did it justice, but we need to explore, I think. I mean, I think it's got potential.
There are certain things that you need to pay a marketing company for certain, you know, outreach and things like that. But overall, there is a large amount of what they do that we do better, even with the staff that we have. So, you know, and they're very highly priced for what they are in comparison to some of the other companies that we have worked with. So, I mean, that's just a fact. So it's an interesting situation. So, but yeah, I think we would get a lot more out of either another company to work for because of what we pay them per hour, or bringing someone in-house to market. I agree with Adrian, to market all of Belmont, not just the Main Street program, but
Yes.
all of Belmont. It's something that we need.
Yes.
Yeah. And if there's a way where we don't have to ask them for permission, I think that, because I remember reading through it and thinking that we probably didn't have to, but you know, I know there is some, you know, it is our tourism authority.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we have 2 council members, and though, it seems clear what the direction of council is on the matter, so perhaps that can also be conveyed.
I mean, Jamie's right about the cost, but then again, I don't know what I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems high, but I don't know marketing. I don't know if that's the industry standard, if it warrants that. I mean, there's no way for me to really know. But I like the idea.
Yeah.
As a person that deals with it on a daily basis, it's
yeah, well, I
Okay,
take
so-
any of these websites Seth built over, I don't know, the websites they built, I'm not a big fan, but, I think that we've got the internal talent that we've got here in the city, I think I think this would be a good addition.
So is that enough direction?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think we beat that horse enough.
No, thank you. That is
Yeah.
what I needed to know to prepare us for June.
So back to
Thank you.
alcohol?
Back to
Now back to
All right, yeah.
Phil, you want to give a quick update on Red, White, and Belmont and what you're asking for from the council today?
Sure. In light of all of the news that's come down recently from the governor and CDC as far as lifting restrictions of mass gatherings, the EPA at the last board meeting decided that we would like to go ahead and have a concert for July 4th and some activities. And this all kind of came about after the last board meeting. So I've asked Adrian that we put forth a request to you, a resolution giving us authority to do the alcohol sales that we normally do for our Friday Night Live concert series and closing of the street the way that we normally do. The only thing that this resolution, the language here, instead of closing the street at the railroad tracks down to Marble and McLeod, we've extended that back up to Catawba Street, if and only if we can. We're working with some National Guard units and some other military units who want to get involved and bring some large military style vehicles down as part of a day-long festivities or half a day. So if that's the case, then we would need somewhere to locate these large trucks and vehicles and helicopter. And so we asked this potentially close off North Main Street from City Hall down to the tracks to have these large vehicles for the kids to come out and see.
And Phil, I want that firefighter contest that Susan Walsall and Happy Birthday America added, so we need the space, okay?
And this is technically July 3rd, correct?
This is on Saturday, July 3rd.
Yes.
Saturday, July.
I'd like to see a tank, Phil.
I'll second that.
I'll show up, I'll roll in there in a tank.
We originally were thinking about locating these vehicles around Stoke Park, but I think one of them is an oversized tank. We can't put that down in Stoke Park.
That would cost a fortune to replace all the sidewalks.
Let's vote on, we want to vote on this quickly before you add something else.
Followed by an invasion of South Carolina.
Yes. I'm from Michigan. We actually had a war with Ohio back in the day, over Toledo of all things.
Wow.
But in any event, so are there any questions for Phil, or are we ready to have a motion?
I think we're ready.
Would you like to make it?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, so the
Just a motion to approve that resolution.
for
the red, white, and Belmont.
Approve the resolution.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Martha seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Resolution passes unanimous. I guess there's no other business then?
No, and your next meeting is next Monday at 6 in here for the
Correct.
Del Webb rezoning.
Yes.
So don't forget about that.
I don't know how I would.
You may have heard about it.
Yes.
I think it's going to be a well-attended meeting.
Good thing we've eased all the restrictions then.
Yeah, we'll crowd them in here.
Pack them in. All right, is there a motion to
I'll
adjourn?
make a motion we adjourn.
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Adjourned.